The Stars and Oilers are all knotted up at 2 going into game number 5 of the Western Conference Finals. Joining the show today, Joey Wheeler of Locked On Stars to break it all down. Let's get to work, Oilers fans.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is now a best of 3 to decide who is going to the Stanley Cup final out of the Western Conference. And boy, do we have a fantastic series between the Dallas Stars and Edmonton Oilers. Alongside Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers, I'm Joey Erickson of Locked On Stars, and thank you guys so much for joining us here on a mid-series update. I know I reached out to Nick earlier in the process, and we said, hey, let's do a mid-series update because this first 4 games of this Western Conference final have been completely insane. So we have a ton of topics of discussion to jump into today. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, Nick, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the first 4 games of this series because the wild momentum shifts in each game of the first 4, let alone the game. I mean, periods has been pretty astronomical, and it seems like if one side is able to find their rhythm, the other side just cannot find a way to slow it down. And I think after the first 4 games, if you're an Edmonton fan, you're thinking, okay, we did our job. We earned a split on the road. And then if you're the Stars, you feel like you did the job for the most part and you earned a split on the road. And that's where we stand. The series is tied at 2 games apiece. And now it's a best of 3, and there's a ton of other outside circumstances that could cause whichever way to tilt to each side. So, what do you make of the first 4?
This is what it's all about. These are the 2 best teams in the Western Conference just throwing bombs at each other back and forth. This is 2 guys not playing a lot of defense, if we're going to use the MMA or boxing analogy, and they are just going back and forth, throwing absolute bombs. I talked about it on the show I did yesterday. At 2-0, after blowing a game, you blew a 2-0 lead in to begin with at home, where everybody paid $500 a ticket to get in and sitting on their hands at 2-0 in the first period. Would have been really easy for that game to get out of hand for the Oilers last night, but they found a way to limp back in, and then they got a little bit of momentum, and then the Tanev injury happens, and Dallas, for the first time, generally looks a little out of sorts. That was, I think, the first time in this series where I really felt Edmonton controlled a good stretch of play. I know I saw that Pete DeBoer said Tanev is up in the air for game 5. So when you lose one of the best defensemen on your team, that's a real momentum swing. And in this game, I feel that it's so hard to carry over anything from game to game. And I think the Oilers have done a good job of that in the playoffs, especially last round where they were coming off a really bad loss in game 5 to go to the brink of elimination, and then they won 6 and 7. Same kind of deal. They had a really bad game 3 loss where they had multiple opportunities to get that lead to 3-0. They let Dallas hang around, and Dallas bounced back, as they do. And then same thing last night. Dallas had chances to make that game 3-0. Stuart Skinner never looked comfortable. Even though it was a 5-2 game, he was really jumpy, and he was really skittish. I felt if Dallas could have got a little more heat on him, maybe a little bit of a different outcome, but these are 2 really good teams going back and forth. I get frustrated when people talk about it through the lens of this team is playing so well. Well, it's back and forth. You know, there's 2 parties going at it here. It's not just this team is playing bad or this team's playing good. It's how they're interacting with each other that's giving us these outcomes. This is awesome. What else would you ask for?
Yeah, no, you're completely correct, and sorry to cut you off there, but it's just 2 guys. It's 2 boxers just throwing haymakers at each other, and eventually the final blow will come at some point. And at the end of the day, sometimes it just comes down to battles, and it's not one team is completely terrible and one team is completely great because at some points it looks like one side is world beaters, and then the next they just forget how to play, so to speak, and I think you're spot on with the point where Dallas just looked all out of sorts once Chris Tanev went down. And obviously, he is kind of the headline coming out of Game 4 for Dallas from a Stars perspective, because is he going to be healthy enough to go in Game 5? And as you mentioned, Pete DeBoer said, fingers crossed. I say I'll see it when I believe it, because Chris Tanev is one tough SOB, and he usually finds a way. He finds a way to get in on the sheet. So when they announce Chris Tanev is not playing, then I'll believe it, and then the Stars will have some real issues for sure moving forward. But yeah, it has been insane, just the back and forth nature of this series, and that's what makes it fun as well. The big boys for both sides, I think, have had their impact in this one, and I feel like both Edmonton and Dallas could say that for the most part, they're playing the series how they would like. From a Dallas perspective, it's not like they have gotten into penalty trouble, and special teams hasn't really been a huge factor until last night when Matthias Janmark got that shorthanded goal. And if you're Edmonton, you've limited the Stars' chances offensively, especially the bottom six. And I think that's been probably the most encouraging sign for Edmonton, at least from my perspective. Would love to hear your thoughts on the bottom six. Has been really, really good. The McLeods, the Carricks of the world, and of course, all the changes that Kris Knoblauch made yesterday, adding in Perry and a few others. They hit, and they've been fast. They've been fantastic for Edmonton, and a big reason why they've won their 2 games.
The thing with the Edmonton bottom six is they're not going to generate a ton of offense, but they're going to get zone time. They're going to be in your zone. They're going to cycle, and they're going to wear you down. And you need that, because there have been a lot of points in the McDavid-Draisaitl tenure where the bottom six is just a bunch of guys. And last night, McLeod, who didn't play in Game 3, comes in, scores a goal, really kind of gets the game going. Corey Perry hadn't played in, I want to say, 4 games, and he was noticeable. I don't know how replicable that's going to be game to game. That might just be he's been sitting around for a week and a half and had a lot of extra juice because of that. But I was very, I don't want to say worried when I saw what the line combinations were during warmups, but to see Corey Perry, who hadn't played in about a week and a half, next to Draisaitl, I was, I definitely squinted a little bit. And I was I have to give a lot of credit that at the 2 points in the playoffs so far for Edmonton, where Kris Knoblauch's kind of made some gutsy decisions, they've worked. Sure, you might be able to poke holes in the logic of them, but they worked ultimately. Back in the last round, it was splitting up Desharnais and Ceci. Last night, it was healthy scratching Desharnais, who I thought Ceci would be the odd man out because he doesn't play on special teams, and Desharnais their right-handed first defenseman on their first penalty kill. They bring in Broberg. Ceci has his best game of the entire playoffs, the first time all playoffs that Ceci was a positive possession player, because he didn't have to do a lot. He was moving with he was playing with a natural puck mover. Nurse and Kulak were an adventure. They were on the ice for the 2 Dallas goals against. Nurse gave the Stars the goal when the puck went off his butt. But if you're going to get the magic push of the buttons the way Knoblauch has these playoffs, where the slight decisions work, last round it was going to Pickard. This round it was going to Broberg, who hasn't played since, I want to say, the last game of the regular season. So when you have a feel for what your team needs like that, it's a real advantage. And the Oilers need every advantage they can in this series.
Yeah, and I think the Stars have done a fairly decent job of taking advantage of when Evan Bouchard is not on the ice. And you mentioned Darnell Nurse. The Stars have been able to attack him pretty well throughout the series. And for the first time, from a Stars fan perspective, you felt like Dallas finally had the advantage in a series, especially with their defensive depth. And it hasn't quite gone to plan in the first 4 games of this series. And now you factor in this Chris Tanev injury. And if he's unable to go moving forward in the series, how you're going to find a way to slow down this Oilers attack is going to be extremely hard. And Pete DeBoer is really going to earn his paycheck here the rest of the way, because Dallas doesn't have a ton of options, and they are going to be very, very vulnerable. You're either going to have to bring up Derek Pouliot, who played in the AHL for the entire season except 1 game where he came up for a spot start. or you have Liam Bixel, who's never played a game in the National Hockey League and played most of the year over in Europe, or you have Niels Lundqvist, who was your sixth defenseman for the first 2 rounds of the playoffs and was barely eclipsing 5 minutes because he was a liability for most of the time he was on the sheet. So if Tanev is unable to go, man, I don't see a great path for Dallas to win this series with the way Edmonton has been able to just attack night in and night out and shift after shift. They've done a great job of just stacking shifts, and that's something I just don't think Dallas has done as much against the Oilers. They haven't been able to just go one after another and wear out Edmonton enough. So I'm really, really curious to see how Dallas is going to attack Edmonton if they don't have Chris Tanev in the lineup, because that is going to be a tall task moving forward, and obviously a huge advantage to Edmonton. And but at the same time, look, they are professionals, and teams grind away at this time of year. Like it's next man up. You just have to find a way, and that's what makes this now best of 3 series really, really fun. So it's going to be a battle for sure. And game 5 just feels very, very important. I do want to segue into Skinner a bit, since you mentioned him early, and I thought Dallas missed on an opportunity to just bury him, because you scored 2 in the first 6 minutes. He was obviously rattled. I think the Oilers were, Rogers' place was, and you had a chance to really bury him. And there's probably no way he's starting game 5 if Dallas puts a couple of more on him, because he's probably getting pulled. And then all that doubt creeps in. But credit to Edmonton. They played better in front of him, which certainly helped. And then he got better as the game wore along. And now maybe he has some confidence moving into game 5. What have you made of Skinner here in the first 4 games? Because I was curious to see if he could keep it up, because he was spectacular in the first 2.
The comparison I would give you for the Oilers and their goaltending is kind of like a pass rush first defense in football, where if they have a lead and they can kind of tee off on you, they can really get after your quarterback and make you uncomfortable. But if you're running the ball effectively and you defang their rush, that's kind of how the Oilers are, where if they're playing from behind, they have a really hard time making up deficits. I know that's ironic to say, being that they did that last night, but when you are trying to create off of the rush, like Edmonton typically is, you need the other team to take chances to give you those opportunities. That's part of why they were able to make that happen last night. Was there was a lot of open space. They were able to get to some 2-on-1s, some 3-on-2s, just to put some heat on the Dallas defense, put some heat on Ottinger, and lighten Skinner's workload. There's no way the Oilers are going to win if Skinner's got to make 30, 40 saves. Is his save percentage in the series good? No, it's not. Below 900. He was 17 of 21 in game 3. He let in 2 really weak ones at the beginning of game 4 that could have sank them. Absolutely could have sank them. He didn't really look comfortable until about midway through the second period, but they did enough that he was able to find enough confidence. And that's really the thing. When you're not one of the 5 guys, when you're not a Shesterkin, you're not a Bob, you're not Ottinger, you're not an Olmark or Swayman, if you're not one of those really, truly special goalies who always kind of finds a way to get back to top 5 in all the key statistics, you're really up and down. There aren't a whole lot of guys that you can bank on in this league at that position. And that's really because the nature of the position. It is really environmentally dependent. And when Skinner has to be the difference maker, the Oilers have trouble. If he only has to be one guy on the team, they can get by doing that. You know, the Avalanche won a Stanley Cup with Darcy Kemper. The Blues won a cup with Jordan Binnington. The Penguins won a cup with Matt Murray. It's doable. If you have a slightly above average goalie and a really good team in front of them, you can make it happen. I would argue it's almost easier to do that than to have the really expensive franchise goalie, just because goalies can't score. You know, we get to this time of year, tonight the Rangers and the Panthers are going to play, and it could be 0-0 for quite a while in that game. And neither of those guys are going to be able to be the difference ultimately in the game, because neither of them can score. So as far as Skinner, he's very volatile. As you saw by the first goal, I'll give him. Johnston's good.
Yeah.
You get beat by a good goal scorer, it happens. The Nurse goal can't happen. That's too soft. And if he's on his post, it doesn't happen. He's a little too wide. He was fine last night. I thought game 1 and 2, he was very good. Game 3, I think he would agree he would want that one back, but they found a way. They don't, at this point in the season, they are not going to ask you, oh, what was your contribution to winning the Stanley Cup? It was, I won the Stanley Cup. They're not going to ask, oh, he only had an .890 save percentage. Okay, they still won.
Yeah, no, you're completely correct. And outside of the first 6.5, 7 minutes for Edmonton, that's the recipe for success they're looking for. They outshot Dallas, they out-hit Dallas, they outblocked them. They were hands down the better team moving forward in Game 4, and Pete DeBoer mentioned that in his post-game presser. So, here we are. We're tied at 2 apiece, and now it's a best of 3 moving forward. Let's dig into the special teams battle a bit, because the power plays haven't really had an impact so far in this series. We're still awaiting our first power play goal, which is pretty remarkable. You think we would have one with how great both sides are in that department, but let's dive into that conversation a bit more and how both teams have found some success, especially on the PK so far. And we'll do that in just a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Stars and Locked On Oilers is brought to you by Game Time. Go ahead and download the Game Time app. It takes 30 seconds. Pull out your smartphone. You can download it on the App Store or the Google Play Store. And Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. If you want to go to the NBA Finals here in a couple of weeks, we expect the Dallas Mavericks to eventually get there here in DFW as they play Game 5 tonight. And you can pick out any seats you want, and you can see the view before you buy it, so you know exactly what you're getting to when you get to the arena. We've all been there when you go to a new arena, a new ballpark, a new facility, and you buy your tickets. You go and sit down. All of a sudden, there's a railing, there's a pole, there's something in your way, and then you think, I would have not bought these tickets if I had known this was going to be the view. And Game Time takes all that guesswork out of buying tickets, because you can see the view, and you can also save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for the NBA Finals, Stanley Cup. You got concerts, comedy, theater, you name it, they have it with Game Time. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL. That's LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Well, the penalty kills for both sides have been fantastic so far throughout the Western Conference Final. And at least for the Oilers' sake, you can say the power play has looked good. It's generated a lot of chances. They just haven't found a way to beat Jake Ottinger or his stick that's just laying on the goal crease or the goal line at this point. But the Oilers' PK, man, has been brilliant. From your perspective, what is it that makes them so effective? Because they've been good all postseason long. It's not just this series. This is a large sample size so far.
They play really high pressure, where as soon as you enter the zone, they immediately have somebody on you, because that's where possession's most sensitive. When you're first establishing the zone and you have to make that choice. Am I going laterally or am I going forward? That's where possession's most sensitive. That's true in both situations, but especially when you're killing the penalty, you're on a man disadvantage. If that puck goes behind you as you start to pressure, that's going to give the rest of the power play time to get in the zone, set up, get to the walls, and start to establish positioning, so that once the puck starts moving, you can try and win it. Or if it's going left to right, you get your stick in the lane, you get the clear, and you get to regroup and reset. And then they block a lot of shots. They've got bigger defensemen. I know I mentioned Desharnais coming out. I was surprised about that because of his role on the kill, but Nurse a big boy. Darnell Nurse is a really tall guy. He's got a long stick. He gets his stick in the lane. Ekholm is one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire league. He's got some of the best positioning of anybody in the league. And I think that's the key here. At this point in the season, you're not going to find big gaps here. And special teams, it's not a huge gap. There haven't been a whole lot of opportunities. I think that's helped as well, that these units aren't particularly taxed. Whether or not you think that's right, or you would prefer the parade to the penalty box, I think that's a different conversation. I think I would prefer it if it was a little bit more in that direction, where if we're just going to call everything, because we should call things to the rule book. Speaking as somebody who has watched the Rangers kind of get their butts physically kicked the last 4 games. I would like to see some more penalties and open the ice up a little bit more, but the penalty kill for the Oilers it's been better than their power play, and their power play is very good. I mean, they haven't scored a power play goal since game 5 against the Canucks, and that's one of the 2 games this year in the postseason where they've scored a power play goal and lost, but they're still finding ways to win without scoring on the power play. The shorty, getting a shorthanded goal is great. And one more thing on the kill. The real momentum it builds when you get a successful kill once your guys come off and you go back to 5-on-5. That's not tangible. That's not something you can track, but it gives you a noticeable jump. Your guys come off, especially because the Oilers' best guys, McDavid, Draisaitl, they're not killing penalties. So typically, the penalty gets killed, and then you get to roll out McDavid or you get to roll out Draisaitl right after you got a little shot in the arm from killing off that penalty. So you get the positive structure stuff about pressuring when you enter the zone, and then you get the tangible boost of, okay, we did that. We're in this game. We didn't concede a goal. And that little boost matters. I know they're professional athletes, and I know we all expect them to have the razor focus all the time, but they are people. You know, you sit at your desk all day, you definitely get distracted a little bit at points. So something to pull you back in, something to say, all right, they did their job. Time for me to go do mine.
Yeah, and Edmonton kills that penalty. Obviously, they get the shorthanded goal from Janmark, and then moments later, it's Draisaitl, and then boom, Edmonton has doubled you up. So it certainly does give you a boost. And even from a Dallas perspective, in Game 3, they killed off that power play early, and I know Edmonton scored a bit later on after that, but it's still a big kill because it could have been 3-0 up to that point, and then Dallas comes roaring back in that second period. I think the Stars would like to win a lot more faceoffs. I don't think they've won a draw on the power play as of yet in this series. I want to say they're probably 0 for 9 or 0 for 10. They just cannot get possession. And you mentioned how aggressive Edmonton is, especially on the point of entry. Dallas just cannot get comfortable. Even when they try to dump and chase, there's nobody chasing. It's just a dump, and then Edmonton gets the easy clear. And Dallas just is unable to set up anything whatsoever. So we'll see how that moves moving forward, of course, within the series. And from a Dallas perspective, it's good that it is a pretty low event special teams battle, because Edmonton, you would think, would have a big advantage in that category, even though they haven't been able to strike on the power play as of yet. But the more opportunities you give to McDavid and Draisaitl, eventually one is going to find the back of the net. You mentioned how the game is being called. From my opinion, I don't really have a great answer. I feel like on no, I'm just saying I don't know if I have a great answer on it. It feels like it's been pretty even. There isn't really one play that stands out to me that that should have been different. That should have been called. I think the Kane penalty in Game 1 was really, really soft on Miro after his dump in. But I feel like they've allowed him to be physical. There isn't a ton that's been egregious, in my opinion. I don't know what you make of the refs or the stripes so far.
I am always of the opinion that the referees are probably doing more than they should.
Yes.
They consistently manage the game. They don't call the game. Like, I forget who it was. There was a play in the game last night where it was 4-2, and someone in the neutral zone just got tripped, like outright tripped. And I know it's not getting called because it's a 4-2 game, and they're not going to put the team that's down 2 goals on the kill in a situation like that. That's really my gripe. It's not specific instances of letting things go versus calling them. It's if the game is the score is what it is. You need to call the rules regardless of what the score is. That's really my gripe with the officiating in these playoffs. I think this series has been really high level hockey. I don't think there have been a lot of penalties. I don't think there have been a lot of really egregiously sloppy plays. Sure, it takes a mistake usually this time of year to beat a good goalie or to get a good scoring chance, but you got to work for it. These are 2 really good teams going at it, and there are going to be ebbs and flows. And last night's game's a perfect example. Game 3 is a great example. It doesn't matter how you start. It matters how you withstand the comeback, because you know that's coming this time of year. It does not matter what the score is. If it's 3-0 in the first period, That's a lot of time to chip away at a lead. And that's what Pete DeBoer had said during the interview on the bench is, all right, we got to see how they withstand this push. We got to see how we handle this push because we know it's coming. Everybody knows this time of year. And it's fascinating because it's 2-0 and the crap, it sounds like a library, but the guys on the bench for the Stars all know, all right, it's coming. We got to be ready. And it came, and ultimately it swung the game.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't mind either when Kris Knoblauch and a couple players for Edmonton came out and said, yeah, we would like a few more penalties. Like, hey, I get it, man. You're going back home for game 3. Your power play is really, really good. And as you mentioned, stripes usually manage the game, and these things tend to even out because Dallas was on the right side for the first couple of games, and then you start seeing it roll the other way for the opponent, and they just find a way to even it out. And unfortunately, the game and the context of the score always plays in, and that can be really, really frustrating to watch when you know you deserve a penalty. I think you're mentioning a Draisaitl one. I think that was the one
that
in
sounds
the
right.
blue lines where he was just taken down. I thought the same thing. I was like, uh-oh, yeah, this isn't good. And then play continues, and you're like, okay, that's what it's going to be tonight. So I guess Dallas is off the hook for now, and they still have a chance. Alrighty, let's segue into a pivotal game 5 in Dallas. We'll talk about some keys for both the Oilers and Stars, and get your feelings on this very, very important game on Friday night. And we'll do that in just a moment. Well, immediately following a game 4 loss for Dallas, I'm of the opinion, and I think I still am after a night's sleep on it, Nick, that whoever wins game 5 is going to win this series. It just feels so important. And maybe that's because all the pressure is back on the Dallas Stars heading back home, and who knows what is happening with Chris Tanev. That injury still looms. This one feels very, very important, especially for Dallas. And I'm sure for Edmonton, where they thought game 4 was probably must win because you don't want to go on the road down 2 games to the Dallas Stars. Do you have that opinion, or do you think there's still some leeway if the team does not come out on top, that they can win a couple of games in 6 and 7 to find a way to win this series?
It's funny you bring this up because I was talking with Hunter because we're going to do the power ranking show literally 20 minutes after we're done recording this. And we both said, I think any of these 4 teams can win the Stanley Cup. And I think any of these 4 teams is capable of coming back from 3-2 down. No matter who wins either of the game 5s, I think the talent is apparent. I mean, I think this genuinely might be the best Final Four of my life. I can't think of a year where all 4 teams are really this good. And yes, the Oilers are doing this with the worst goalie of the 4, and that's definitely the most problematic aspect of any of the 4 teams as far as talent disparities. But Edmonton absolutely can go on a crazy heater. McDavid made some nice plays last night. Leon got on the sheet after not being on there the first couple games of the series. Neither of them has really gone crazy in this series yet. That's always looming there somewhere for them in this series. So no, the stats, something like 80, I want to say like 81% of teams that win the game 5 and a 2-2 go on to win the series. Didn't matter for Edmonton last round. It happens. It's not impossible. And I think there is not a big enough gap between the teams that 3-2 is insurmountable.
Yeah, it really has been a fantastic conference final for both sides. The Eastern Conference is crazy with the amount of power plays and how physical it has been. Like, Florida just wants to bully teams. They just want to wear you down. Literally, they want to hit everything in sight, and try to destroy you for as many games as it will allow. And then from this Western side of things, it's been just kind of up and down, back and forth hockey. Not a ton of great defense, not a ton of special teams, and it makes for great drama, and it makes for great theater. So yeah, I'm really curious to see what game 5 will bring. Dallas just has to respond, and they're going to have to get back to the basics and what makes them really, really successful. And that's winning battles and being hard on the forecheck and trying to be more stingy defensively. It just hasn't come to fruition in this series. And you have to give credit to Edmonton. That's the amount of pressure they put on you. And it's really hard to wrap around the McDavids and Draisaitl to find a way to limit their offensive chances, because every game they've been outshot so far in the playoffs, they've lost. So Dallas has to put more pressure on Skinner. And as you mentioned, he's probably not going to be the difference in this series. Well, Dallas needs to make him the difference. If you can find a way to make him the difference here in the best out of three, then maybe good things are going to happen for you down the stretch. What are your biggest keys for Edmonton here in Game 5 on Friday night? Because if Edmonton and Draisaitl just go crazy, because that's still in them for sure, it's going to be lights out for Dallas.
I'm very curious to see if Kris Knoblauch pushes the right lineup buttons again. I don't think it's a coincidence that their best defensive games of the entire playoffs have been the games where Nurse and Ceci haven't played together. They were really good in games 6 and 7 against Vancouver, with those guys playing on different pairs, with Nurse's minutes being about 2 minutes less than they were in the regular season. But for whatever reason, he went back to Nurse and Ceci and then Kulak and Desharnais at the start of this round. It took 3 games to get away from that again. Broberg did a nice job of managing Ceci. He got all the transitions. Barry would go get it. Broberg would break it out. They had a really good thing. I don't know how they're going to do in Dallas, where they won't have the benefit of last change, where you could see who's out there before you send them out there. So I think that, and then the forwards, the Oilers have been up and down with their forward group, who's been in, who's been out, because they've had some guys who were dinged up. But I don't know if Corey Perry's going to play again. That might be a one-time deal of shot in the arm from a guy who hasn't played in a few weeks, has a little bit of extra juice. But I think that's the biggest key, because I think the range of outcomes for the Oilers is not enormous when we're talking about the actual team with Skinner, God knows. So that's where the big range of outcomes comes from for them. But for the actual forwards, defensemen, I think we're talking about the margins. I think you probably can't put Desharnais back in just because of how good the defense was in Game 4. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work in Game 5. But I think you can't go away from what worked. It's very frustrating when coaches have actual in-game evidence of something that works and works well, and then they change it because, well, I feel this way. That's very frustrating.
Yeah, Pete DeBoer did that in Game 4, right? He inserted Radek Faksa back into the lineup for Craig Smith, who has been very, very good throughout the postseason. So I would suspect that Craig Smith is probably going to be back in at home in Game 5, because he wanted some fresh legs in the lineup, which is pretty rare for Pete DeBoer, to be honest. He usually sticks with what is working, but he's had to juggle a lot of lines, and that's just the nature of the postseason as well. I think some of the pressure and stuff starts to leak in, and you feel the need to try to switch something up just for the sake of it at some points, and that's not always the best case scenario. But yeah, Kris Knoblauch, credit to him. He pushed the right buttons, and we'll see which coach wins that battle moving forward here in the best of 3. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for hopping on for a little mid-series update. A ton of fun. Any final thoughts you have before we part ways?
Can't believe how fast all the Stars young guys have gotten this good. Like, Johnston is a child. Johnston's just legal drinking age now, right? He just turned 21, and he's already borderline elite player. Robertson's already had 40 tucks. They're a really good group, and other than, Pavelski, Ben, Sagan, Dadonov, they're a pretty young group too.
Yeah, no, they certainly are. And I appreciate you giving that point. I really do, because I think it's good for Stars fans to still have a perspective, because I've had some people coming after me, especially after Game 4, like, oh, you tout Dallas and all their depth and how good they are. Like, where are they? And it's like, I understand, but even if Dallas loses this series, they were still a deep hockey team. That doesn't change that they were deep and they had a lot of good players. Sometimes you just get beat, and they got to show up at important times, and that doesn't always happen. So And I think you could say that for Edmonton too. They're a really good team. They've made it to the Final Four. That's really hard to do this time of year. You can ask a lot of other teams. That doesn't happen quite a bit. So thank you for that perspective. I appreciate you appreciate you showing Robo and Johnston some love, because they should be good for years to come. Alrighty, that'll do it for this little mid-series update of the Western Conference Final. The road to the Stanley Cup continues. It's a best of 3. You wouldn't want to have it any other way. Stars and Oilers on Friday night. So be sure to stay up to date with Locked On Oilers and myself at Locked On Stars. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Locked On Stars are close to 3,000 subscribers. This is a shameless plug, Nick. So please continue to hit that button. We're almost there. Hopefully we can reach it by the end of this series. All righty. Well, Nick, thank you once again. I'm going to keep doing it and rambling, but we'll see you again, and hopefully we'll see you, the listener, very, very shortly as well. Well, that'll do it for this special crossover edition, and so long, everybody.